to read through on the internet. And we're going to be looking at that in just a minute to look at some of those fallacies. Thank you, Randy. To look at some of the fallacies, because I do expect you to know and understand when you hear a logical fallacy, be able to identify it. And as you study these, I'll just go ahead and tell you that you're going to start seeing them everywhere. You're going to start hearing them in the news. You're going to start hearing them from people on the streets. You're going to hear it in music. You're going to hear it in discussions where people are arguing about things. These are fallacies that fail in their arguments, but you need to understand why they're failing and be able to identify them. And you need to make sure you're not doing those same things and falling into those same logical fallacies. So we'll talk about a few of those tonight. Then there's a whole area of science and scientific apologetics. And this is things like physics and biology and astronomy, those areas that we've talked about before with regard to creation, the things we see in the Hubble telescope. All of those are scientific areas of apologetics. Then we have the historic and evidentiary. And we've talked a little bit about that too. The idea that the quality of the evidence is essential in terms of weighing how good the evidence is and how good our historical presentations are. So a couple of the ways that we begin to identify that is, what is the quality of the person that we're hearing from? Or do they have authority? And are they good historians? Or are they good witnesses? Now, what makes a good witness? A good witness would be somebody who doesn't have a dog in the fight. Somebody that has something to gain by witnessing in a particular way or speaking in a particular way is not a very good witness, because they have something to gain by it. Somebody that hadn't got anything to gain or lose makes a better witness. And even a person that is giving evidence for something, and just because they're giving evidence, they have a lot to lose. For instance, the apostles, lots of times they were giving evidence. They could have lost their lives for the evidence they were giving. So they make particularly strong witnesses because they have something to lose in the process. I'm seeing Michael try to check back in there. So historical evidence comes across that way. The dates of the manuscripts, how close in time are the manuscripts to the events they're recording? If it's, for instance, Chris, you and I talked about one time before the fact that the closest evidence for Julius Caesar to the events of his life, the closest manuscripts is about 1,000 years after he lived. But then we have evidence of the manuscripts we have within 25 or 30 years of the time that the events took place. So our evidence is very close. And then the question becomes, how many manuscripts do we have? Do we only have one manuscript or two? For instance, for Julius Caesar, within 1,000 years, we only have 3 manuscripts. So that's that, but yet nobody questions the evidence for Julius Caesar. But we have literally thousands of manuscripts or fragments of manuscripts that date back within 50 or 60 years of the events that they're recording. And then again, as I said, how credible are the witnesses or the manuscripts? Or do they bear the marks or the identification or the fingerprints of having some credibility? And then we have archaeological evidence. And you can see how archaeological evidence and historic evidence cross together. Yeah, if you got your mic on, I'm going to mute you, Mike, just because I'm hearing you. And if you need to speak, you can unmute yourself. But archaeological evidence crosses over those areas as well. The textual evidence, in other words, the biblical records that we have, other records, historical records that we have, edicts that were, other literature that we have, other historians, non-biblical historians that record the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, for example. Or, for instance, the governor Quirinius that's mentioned in Luke chapter 2. For centuries, we had no evidence outside of the Bible that this person ever existed. And then suddenly in the archaeological evidence, his name was found. And then it was discovered that that name that was found, that was a governor of Syria, which is how the Bible identifies him, was not in the time frame that the Bible indicated. So then there became this whole debate about, well, the Bible's not accurate because it didn't record it in the right time frame. Well, then we found out there was another Quirinius who was governor of Syria in the time frame that was being referenced in the Bible. So there were two Quiriniuses, governor of Syria, two different time frames. And so we have the continuing unfolding and unpacking of the evidence showing that it's accurate and true. So those are the basic categories. And there's others, but like I say, all of these overlap to some degree. And Michael's trying to get back in again. He's got some connection problems as well. And I want you to pay particular attention and note that there are no emotional apologetics. There are no emotional.
Anyway. Okay.
Okay, so I've muted you again, Michael. The reason that's important is because we have a lot of churches and an awful lot of pastors today that spend 80 to 90% of their time presenting sermons in an emotional manner. That the impact of their sermon comes in generating emotion, but you don't see any emotional apologetics ever. Now, what are our apologetics for? We remember 1 Peter 3:15 is our text that talks about this fact that we are always to be prepared to give an answer to anyone that asks us a reason for the hope that is within us, and to do that with gentleness and respect. We're giving these apologetics against certain things and for certain things. We're speaking against cultic beliefs and cultic belief systems, atheistic beliefs, those that claim there is no God. We want to proclaim loud and clear there is a God and be able to give evidence of that in these areas. The materialist or naturalist. And then those I'm going to throw into the area of presuppositions, not to be confused with what is called presuppositional apologetics, which maybe we'll get a chance to get into a little bit, but probably not going to spend a lot of time talking about the differences. But presuppositions are people that come to the table, let's say like Richard Dawkins, I've mentioned several times, who was a new atheist. Richard Dawkins comes to the table with a whole host of presuppositions. His presuppositions start with there is no God, there is no supernatural, there are no miracles. So if you come to the table with those presuppositions, you've automatically ruled out any possibility of finding answers that fit into those categories. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So what we need to understand is if you're eliminating possibilities, that you're eliminating whole categories of areas that the evidence might lead you to answers. What we want to do as apologists is say, I'm going to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And that's the duty of a good Christ follower. It's the duty of a good apologist, is to follow the evidence wherever it leads. In fact, it's the duty of a good scientist to follow the evidence wherever it leads. The problem with that is today that our scientists more and more are falling into this belief system that there is no objective scientific reality. And so they follow these very obscure scientific trails that absolutely eliminate any possibility of anything doesn't fall into the natural, physical, material world. But if you eliminate,
which is the opposite of what they should be doing.
Excuse me?
Which is the opposite of what they should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. We need to understand that our objective is not to eliminate possibilities, but to look at all of the evidence and then say, where does the evidence lead? What is the most reasonable assumption that can be made from the evidences we have? Whatever those evidences are, whether they're scientific evidences, historical evidences, scientific evidence, logical arguments, or philosophy. So those are our objectives, is to follow the evidence wherever it might take us. Okay, I'll see. Okay, so let's look at some logical fallacies here in just a minute. That little link that I sent you separate after I sent you the invitation for this meeting, the link I sent you separate had 15 logical fallacies in it. And we're going to bring that up. Can everybody see this? There you go. Good. All right. 15 logical fallacies. Did everybody get a chance to look that over? Okay. Everybody knows the fallacies now, right? If I talk about them, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about, right? All right, good. I see that. Let me just tell you, this is a difficult thing because a lot of times these fallacies kind of hide between the lines. And we're so used to hearing people talk about these things in ways that that are not logical. And you realize that as you begin to listen to news stories, as you begin to listen to politicians, particularly, as you begin to hear why people say they believe certain things or they don't believe certain things, I'm gonna just say most of the reasoning that they give for either believing or not believing in certain things, most of those reasons will fall into these fallacy areas. So you need to be able to be in tune to that and go back to them and take them apart. So let's look at what a logical fallacy is here. It says here, a logical fallacy is an error in reasoning. So we've talked about how these syllogisms go together, for example. If you don't put those syllogisms together correctly, or if there is a syllogism that has a premise that is not true, then you're going to not have conclusions that are true. They might follow what the premises are, but they're not going to be true. So you've got to have two true premises, each of which link together in the ways that we've described before, and also naturally follow with a conclusion. So how do you spot and identify fallacies? Really is a priceless skill. I agree with this wholeheartedly. Now, the thing I will tell you, the more you study this, the more this is going to drive you nuts. The more that every time you hear one of these, it's going to absolutely drive you crazy because you're going to see it and hear it and you're going to go, no, that's not right. That doesn't work. And I want you to be that way. I want you to your red flags to go up, and I want your antenna to go up, and I want your rejection, no, stop, I'm not going to accept that attitude to come in play. And I want you to begin to analyze these things. So let's look at a couple of these that are some of my favorites that you're going to hear a lot. When somebody doesn't have an argument to make against your evidence for Christ, one of the most common ways they will attack you is to attack you personally. Mm-hmm. So if they don't have an argument against your presentation, against your argument, if they don't have anything to say to defeat that argument, they'll attack the person. Well, I know what they said about this, but that guy's just a liar. Everybody knows he's a liar. Well, he may be a liar, in his everyday life, but that doesn't defeat the argument. The question is, does the argument stand on its own? Does the argument work? It's not whether the guy's a liar or, yeah, he's from the other side of the tracks. You can't listen to him. He never went to school. He doesn't have any education. You can't pay any attention to him for that reason. Well, he might not have any education, but it doesn't defeat the argument. This is called an ad hominem attack or an ad hominem fallacy, and it is attacking the person rather than addressing the argument. Because this is one that you will see over and over again, you might see it on your exam as well. I'll just go ahead and tell you that on the front end of this. An ad hominem attack or fallacy is more than just an insult. It's an insult that is used as an argument, as a substitute for evidence. It's not evidence, it's a substitute for evidence. And it attacks the person. So I don't know if any of you looked at any of these videos, but let me play this one. And
ad hominem is a Latin phrase meaning literally to the man. It refers to a logical fallacy, or in other words, a bad argument. Ad hominem is when someone uses a personal attack as an argument. This takes many forms, 4 of which will be covered in this video. The first is the abusive form. For example, John argues that because dark chocolate has antioxidants and most other candies only have sugar, which rots your teeth, dark chocolate is therefore better than most sweets. Tim responds to this argument, "Yeah, but you're a greedy jerk." Whatever John's moral character may be, Tim's response is not an argument. John may in fact be a greedy jerk, but that doesn't make him wrong. Another more common variant of this is the circumstantial form. For example, if Tim were to respond to John's argument saying, "Yeah, but you work for the chocolate company. You're paid to say that." John may have been paid to make the argument, but that doesn't address the argument he was making. Now, if Tim were to respond to John's argument, "Yeah, but I saw you eating a candy cane," this would be an example of the third variant of ad hominem, called tu quoque, which is Latin for "you also." Being a hypocrite does not invalidate an argument. The fourth and final form of ad hominem is the guilt by association. This would be if Tim responded to John by saying, "Nazis also believed dark chocolate was better," implying that, holding this belief, John is as bad as a Nazi. That still is not an argument. John may in fact be a Nazi, but that doesn't automatically make him wrong. It certainly doesn't address the issue at hand. Just remember, a personal attack is not an argument. So the next time you see this happening in a discussion, make sure to link them to this video.
Yeah, you heard anything like that lately in the political realm?
I've heard every one of those in the political realm within the last week. Very, very pointed.
Yeah, and you're going to hear them over and over again. And these politicians are not making legitimate arguments. They're attacking the person.
Yep.
Attack the person. I don't like the way he looks. I don't like the way she talks. I've had people say to me in certain situations, "Well, you've got a Southern drawl, so you must be a hick. So just I can't pay any attention to you." All of those things are ad hominem attacks. They attack the person rather than the argument. You need to recognize it.
Or the association you have with somebody. We've seen that a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Whether somebody is associated with something does not defeat the argument. They can be associated with a group. They can be any number of things that aren't very attractive or don't hold a lot of credibility, but it doesn't attack the argument. One more I want to do is the straw man argument. Now, straw man argument is an argument that somebody gives you an argument and you want to defeat that argument. And what that person does is create what they call a straw man. And that all that means is that you take their argument and you weaken it and you represent it in a way that's easy to defeat. And that's called a straw man because you've created something that's easy to tear apart or easy to take down or easy to burn up.
Example. What would be an example, Pastor?
Okay, I'm gonna play this video in just a minute. But let's say a straw man argument, someone attacks a position of the opponent that the opponent does not hold. They weaken the argument. Somebody says, well, I believe Jesus was a man, but I don't believe that he was God. And the Jehovah's Witness says, well, I believe he was a very good man. He was a great teacher. I believe he was even a prophet. And the Christian goes, well, I believe he was a prophet too. But what they're not agreeing on is that, and this is sort of a reverse straw man, they're not agreeing on all that Christ is. The tear down of the straw man argument would be like somebody saying, well, I get around well in Santa Rosa. I'm going to say that because I got lost coming over here today, even though I've been here half a dozen times. I get around well in Santa Rosa, and the guy and I know my way to how to get somewhere really well. And the guy says, well, you needed a map to get there. You didn't get there on your own. You needed a map to get there, and therefore you don't know your way around very well. Well, you know, he is restating my position in a different way and tearing down my argument, but he's not tearing down my argument. He's tearing down a false argument. So here's a couple of examples. Senator thinks we can solve our problems, ecological problems, by driving a Prius. Example 2. Quite to the contrary, the senator thinks the environment is such a wreck that no one's car choice or driving habits would make the slightest difference. So it's two very different arguments that are being made. So to give a better example, let's watch this one.
Hi, I'm Joseph Wu, and I'm a philosophy graduate student at the University of Cambridge. In this video, I'll explain the straw man fallacy, an informal fallacy that comes up all the time. Let's start off with an example to see how it works. Suppose my friend Maureen presents the following argument. Premise 1. Advertisements for beer encourage underage drinking. Premise 2. Underage drinking often has negative consequences. Conclusion. Therefore, advertisements for beer should be banned from TV. And let's say I respond with the following objection. Well, yeah, but people will never give up drinking beer. They've been doing it for ages. Is this a good response to Maureen's argument? No, because Maureen never claims it would be a good idea to give up drinking beer. That's not her argument at all. In this scenario, I've committed the straw man fallacy, since I've attacked a position that Maureen never advances. The straw man, or straw person, fallacy occurs when an opponent's position is misrepresented in order to make it easier to critique. Just like how a man made of straw is intended to resemble an actual man, a straw man fallacy occurs when an opponent's position is presented in a way that resembles the original claim, but is not the actual claim advanced. It creates the illusion that a position has been refuted or critiqued by switching out the original position with a different one. To see this more clearly, consider the following two claims. Advertisements for beer should be banned from TV. This is Maureen's original claim. People should stop drinking beer. This is my portrayal of Maureen's original claim. And these are two very different claims. Maureen only endorses the first one based on our conversation. However, my objection is to the second claim, which is much easier to refute. This is because the second claim is a very extreme view. It would take a lot of good arguments to convince others that people should stop drinking beer. But in our argument, I have improperly attributed this extreme view to Maureen, and then proceeded to attack it. Since this claim is much easier to refute than her original claim, I have committed the straw man fallacy. The general structure of straw man fallacies goes like this. First, person 1 advances position X. Second, Person 2 presents a distorted version of position X. Let's call this position Y. Third, person 2 attacks position Y. And fourth, person 2 concludes that position X is false. In the straw man fallacy we've just considered, the original view is exaggerated to a very extreme view and then attacked. But there are other ways in which a position can be misrepresented as well. Sometimes a position can be oversimplified to the point of being absurd. Here's an example of that. Suppose my friend Gio presents the following argument. Premise 1. The theory of evolution says that humans are no different from apes. Premise 2. Humans are different from apes because humans are obviously smarter. Conclusion, therefore, the theory of evolution is false. Is this a good argument? Clearly not, since the theory of evolution does not claim that humans are no different from apes. Gio has falsely characterized what the theory of evolution says and then proceeded to attack it. He has committed the
So what he's done is the first premise is not true. The theory of evolution says that humans are no different than apes. That's not what the theory of evolution says. So if your premises are not true, as we've said before, your conclusion's not going to be necessarily be true either. It may be true, but it's not going to necessarily be true, even if it follows from the premises that are made.
Straw man fallacy. But it's worth noting that the structure of his argument is valid. So for anyone not familiar with evolutionary theory, it might seem as if Gio has provided a good argument against evolution. And this is why straw man fallacies can often be difficult to spot. The straw man fallacy is prevalent in politics as well, and it is not just used to misrepresent an opponent's position. Often, straw men are set up to distract people from difficult topics that politicians want to avoid.
Watch this one.
For example, consider how politicians construct straw man responses by answering a question they were never asked. Suppose a politician is being accused of illegally using campaign funds for personal use. Let's say a reporter asked the politician directly, "So, did you or did you not use campaign funds for personal spending?" And the politician might respond with something like this. "That's an excellent question. I've received a lot of generous donations to my campaign. My favorite donation has been a handwritten card thanking me for everything I've done. I really love that card, especially since I value the dedication of working class people." In this example, the politician sets up a straw man by responding to a different question than the one originally asked. The question was whether campaign funds have been used for personal spending, but the politician provides an answer to the question, "What has been your favorite campaign donation?" This is a much easier question to answer, and it allows the politician to avoid answering the original question while also portraying himself or herself positively. Strawman fallacies are everywhere, and you've probably come across variations of the examples presented here in your everyday life. Sometimes strawman fallacies are intentional, which is often the case in politics, but other times they are unintentional, like when someone genuinely misunderstands an opponent's claim. In order to keep discussions productive, it is important to grasp the exact position being advanced before proceeding to attack it. Otherwise, you may be guilty of committing the strawman fallacy.
Okay, so you can see what's happening there. If you just think about what you see politicians argue about, this is standard procedure. You almost never get a straight answer in these interviews that you see on television. And the same thing happens in debates. If you'll go back and watch Richard Dawkins and John Lennox debate, what you're going to hear Dawkins do more often than not is answer a different question than what he's asked. And what you'll see John Lennox do consistently is always answer the question very thoroughly. And so just have your antenna up to be able to recognize these different types of illegitimate arguments. Okay, appeal to ignorance isn't a proof of anything except that you don't know anything about something. For instance, somebody says there's no one has been able to prove definitively that extraterrestrials exist. so they must not be real. So they say nobody's been able to prove it, therefore they must not be real. Nobody's been able to show and prove Jesus Christ died on a cross, to prove it in a physical manner. Therefore, he must not have ever died in a physical manner that way. Well, the question is, okay, we're looking at physical evidence. What about the historical evidence? That's why I wanted to start with where I did tonight. What about the archaeological evidence? What about the many manuscripts of eyewitnesses that personally witnessed the resurrection of Christ? Do those not count as evidences? Well, those are the kind of things that fall into this category: appeal to ignorance, or trying to prove a negative. You can't prove a negative, and that's just a philosophical reality. And just always remember that you can't prove a negative. Also, and I'll get off this logical fallacies area after this one, but I want you to see this one too, because this is another one that's used all the time. And it's either called a false dilemma or a false dichotomy. Now, dilemma or dichotomy, all that means is that you're presented with two choices. So John's taking a trip, and he's either going to the mountains or he's going to the beach. Well, that's not the only choices he's got. He may go to the mall. There are other choices that can be made there. So you're given a false choice between two things, that's not the only choices that you have to make. So if a false dichotomy only gives you two choices, and it's generally viewed as a black and white kind of dilemma. False dilemma fallacy is often a manipulation or manipulative tool. It's used to manipulate. You see this I really like this little video too. This is a video because it is, if you've got kids and you watch them grow up and go through the teenage years, they're masters at this. Daddy, if I don't go to this party, I'm not going to be considered cool, and I'll I'm not going to have friends in school anymore. So I need to go to the party, because if I don't go, here's it's a false dilemma. Well, what if you don't go to the party and you do have friends? So let's watch this little video, and then, like I said, we're gonna move on to something else here.
I'm the only good one.
Do you think you and Mommy did a good job raising me?
Of course we did.
Well, then you obviously taught me right from wrong.
True.
And you should trust me to do the right thing.
Wait.
Or you're a bad father. Take your pick.
You're good.
So, kids really are good at that. I am going to do one more real quick. Just the slippery slope is another one of those fallacies that says if you do this, or if you make this choice, there's a series of events that naturally are going to follow. It's called a slippery slope because if you do the first one, you're going to gravitate and slide down the slope, and all these other things are going to happen. Let's use this one right here. If America doesn't send weapons to Syrian rebels, they won't be able to defend themselves against a warring dictator. They'll lose their civil war, and that dictator will oppress them, and the Soviets will consequently carve out a sphere of influence that spreads across the entire Middle East. So you see how they assume one thing is absolutely going to lead to another, and they present it in a way that are absolutes. So if this happens, you're going to have this whole series of dominoes that are going to fall, and that's called a slippery slope. If you step here, you're going to slide down the slope. There's no two ways about it. So I'm not going to play that video, but there's a host of other circular arguments. You need to be able to recognize that. I've talked to you about that one before. A circular argument is an argument that begins with its conclusion. generally that conclusion will be stated in a different way. God is not all powerful is going to be your conclusion, but they'll start with something like, God couldn't do a particular thing. So they make it something less than the argument you make when you say God is all powerful. So they say God can't make a stone so big that he can't pick up. Okay, it's not an argument that can be made. You're making, and then because you're going to come back around and you're going to come to the conclusion again. So let's take their example here. Because pot is against the law, it leads many to believe that it is wrong. So the circular argument is made by Spock in this way.
What an escape. Captain Kirk is the best starship captain in the fleet. That's why he was assigned command to the Federation's flagship. He's great, all right, but I don't know that he's the best. They gave him command of the flagship because no other captain was as good as he is. Captain Kirk is the Enterprise's commander, and the Enterprise is the Federation's flagship, isn't it? Well, yeah, I guess so. Well, that proves it. Captain Kirk is the best starship captain in the fleet. That's why he was assigned command to the Federation's flagship. Excuse me, gentlemen. I couldn't help overhearing. Yes, sir? The argument you are employing, Mr. Kyle, is not logical. In fact, it exhibits the fallacy of petitio principii, also known as circular reasoning or begging the question. The argument seems to make sense. That may be so, but the form of the argument is invalid. Arguments employing this fallacy all assume a premise statement which has the same meaning as a conclusion. You essentially were saying that Captain Kirk is the best starship captain in the fleet and assigned to Starfleet's flagship because no other captain was as good as he is. You employed circular reasoning because the phrase no other captain was as good as he is the same as saying he is the best starship captain in the fleet. Oh, indeed. That is not to say that Captain Kirk isn't.
So he could be making a true statement, but he's saying the same thing in a different way. And that's just a circular argument. You can prove anything with a circular argument, because if you assume something is true as a premise, you're gonna be able to come to that conclusion in the end. So those are the kind of things you're going to see in these all of these logical fallacies. But I want you to know what these are and be able to identify them as we get into them further. Okay, let's see. We're at 340. So let's move from logical fallacies up to philosophical. And we've been studying C.S. Lewis and the C.S. Lewis Institute tapes. Now, C.S. Lewis, his primary area of apologetics is philosophy. And if you start listening to him and listening to his reasoning, what he is doing is reasoning philosophically. So when we start talking about so many of his books, Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, all of these are books that will employ philosophical apologetics. And so just know when you're reading him, you're not typically going to see him argue the Big Bang Theory. He's talking about philosophical apologetics. So let's look at a couple of his thoughts with regards to philosophical arguments in a syllogistic form. Now, specifically, what we want to look at is his argument from desire. This is an argument that you'll not hear somebody like a Norm Geisler make. Norm Geisler never would have made this argument. He argued more from a scientific or even logical, using syllogistic forms, but he wouldn't have argued this kind of philosophical argument very often.
Yeah.
Most of his arguments came in other forms, as opposed to C.S. Lewis, who wrote Mere Christianity, and that makes and in that book talked about this term that was talked about in the video that you watched, sinsuk. Sinsuk is, according to C.S. Lewis, a desire that leaves us with a longing. A desire that leaves us with a longing. And he says that every longing that we have, whether it's a physical longing, a spiritual longing, an emotional longing, that whatever that desire is that we have, that God has provided a fulfilling of that longing.
Yeah.
Okay? So what he is going to argue is if the small things are true, and he considers the small things that we might consider big things like hunger. You get hungry, physically hungry, and God has provided a source of fulfilling that need to where you have food to eat. You get thirsty, you have water to drink. You get cold, you have ways of getting warm. You have an emotional need, and God provided a helpmate and friendships and relationships. You have all of these longings, and the longings all have fulfillments in God's creation. That's basically what C.S. Lewis is arguing, that there is a fulfillment to every longing. So that if we have a need, that we're going to see that need fulfilled in the longing. So let's look at this syllogism from desire. I'm going to try to move us over a little bit here. There we go. Okay, there exists in us a desire which nothing in time, nothing on earth, no creature can satisfy. So what he has done, what C.S. Lewis has done, has moved from what he calls the small desires, the little d desires, those things that we want. We want relationships. We don't have to have them, but we want them, and we're better off for having them. But we don't have to have them. We have to have food, but we don't have to have prime rib. We don't have to have certain kinds of food. We just have to have some source of food. We don't have to have Coca-Cola. I've learned in the last year and a half, I can live without Coca-Cola. I was a 3 Coke a day guy prior to my diet. I don't drink any Coke anymore, but it doesn't mean that occasionally I don't go, it'd be nice to have a Coke. I still have that longing for something. What C.S. Lewis does is he moves from those physical, emotional desires of the eyes, desires of the ears, desires of the taste buds, desires of the smell and the odors. He moves from that to something he says is the grand desire. There exists in us a desire which nothing in time, nothing on earth, no creature can satisfy. The major premise then is every natural or innate desire, which we've already talked about, in us points to a corresponding real object that can satisfy that desire. And what he concludes from that is that if God has provided those little d desires to be fulfilled, he concludes there exists something outside of time, space, earth, and creatures which can satisfy the grand desire.
Amen.
This huge desire, this longing that we have, we can't even verbalize, we can't even put into words, we can't even totally get our arms around, but there is a longing there for that. And in what C.S. Lewis concludes in many of his writings, if you just read them and look at them, even things like the Screw Tape Letters is a great example, that there is desires within us that we try to fulfill with things that God never designed to fill that void in us. And so we push in the drugs, and we push in the sex, and we push in all of these things, trying to fulfill this longing, this desire that we have, that we know instinctively can be fulfilled, but we don't have an idea of where to go get the answer to fulfill that desire. And that's the heart cry for the preacher that's preaching sermons at every pulpit in America, that it longs to reach a congregation with, here is what it takes to fulfill that desire in you. You tried to stuff it full of all the wrong stuff. And yes, it exists. Yes, it's real. But you're trying to fulfill it with the wrong things. Now, there's a couple of things here that we should address to say why we choose the wrong things, or we try to suppress the desire. C.S. Lewis says there's a fool's way of trying to fulfill the desire, and that's to put the blame on things. I have a longing for this Jaguar, but I can't afford a Jaguar. So stupid Jaguar, stupid Jaguar. I don't really want that anyway. It's a stupid old car. Blame it on the things, or it's too expensive. There's no use to charge that much for that automobile. You can put the blame on things, and C.S. Lewis says that's the fool's way of addressing this issue. Then there's the way of what he calls the disillusioned cynic, that just says, don't expect too much pleasure and then you won't be disappointed. Here's the thing. God created in us a desire for this pleasure, this longing, this relationship with him that only he can fulfill, and he desires us to have that. Now, here's the thing I want you to understand about this number 2 right here. This is basically the premise of the Hindu and the Buddhist, who say that the problem man has is that he has desires. And that's not a good thing, it's a bad thing. The Hindu says that our objective in living, and the Buddhist says our objective in living is to kill the desire within us so that we don't have that longing anymore. To suppress the desire, to kill it. And the Buddhist priest that has done his work is said to have totally killed the desire, the human desires within himself, so that he can better help those around him kill their desires within themselves. And God says, Jehovah God says, no, I designed you, I created you with desires. There's a problem with the way you've tried to fill that desire and fill that void, but it's a good thing you've got the desire. So the Christian way, he says, is creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exist.
Amen.
So let's look at, okay, the Hindu desires to eliminate. Let's look at the demonic use of desires. Demons use desires, and C.S. Lewis addresses this in his book, The Screwtape Letters. Now, if you haven't read the Screwtape Letters, let me just say, every Christian needs to read the Screwtape Letters.
Mm-hmm.
Do not let this book pass you by. You need to read this to comprehend because it's like a fictitious novel, but that has very real characters in it from which you will learn the devil's methodology. The demonic use of desire, Screwtape, for example, Screwtape is the old demon. If you've never read this or don't know anything about it, Screwtape is the old, experienced, wise old demon that is training up the younger, less experienced demons. And Screwtape is talking to Wormwood, who is one of these young demons, these young and inexperienced demons. And Screwtape says to Wormwood, he says, Wormwood, play to man's weaker desires. Don't play to his big desires, his longings for God. Play to man's weaker desires. And in another book, C.S. Lewis, in A Weight of Glory, here's the way C.S. Lewis puts it. Here's what he's talking about in Screwtape Letters, but he puts it so succinctly here. He says, our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child content to play with mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. So you see, what C.S. Lewis is doing is building a philosophical argument that is weighted in real life experiences that we can understand in our very limited way. And he's trying to help us understand that God created us with desires. What we need to do as apologists is learn to help people funnel the way they're answering those desires in a way that is productive for them and productive for the kingdom of God. Does that make sense?
Yep.
We need to understand this process if we're going to be good apologists. C.S. Lewis is a great philosophical apologist because he understands this desire area, and he, all the way through all of his books, in one form or another, he is appealing to an answer to the question of how does man fulfill the natural desire within himself? How does he fill the void of the spiritual void that's within him? And he is giving us an answer that says our problem is that we're trying to fill a huge void with very weak and meager answers that will never fill the void. And those weak and meager answers, those little answers, as Screwtape says to Wormwood, always offer man the weaker satisfaction. Answer his weaker arguments. Look for those things. If we're going to do this, we need to understand that there are tests for truth that fall into three categories. And if you read C.S. Lewis thoroughly, what you'll see is he goes back to these things over and over again. These tests for truth fall into three categories. We've talked about logical consistency when we were back in systematic theology. And you'll remember that I started talking to you about systematic theology in this way. Systematic theology is putting together a theological framework in which you are going to live and create a worldview. And that framework has to be logically consistent. It has to fit together. It all has to fit together and work together. It can't be inconsistent. So if it's not logically consistent, if you have one of these logical fallacies within your theological framework, you've got a failure there somewhere you need to address. So if you go back and you analyze your theological system or your theological framework, and you discover there is a logical fallacy within that framework, you need to address that. You need to think through this. Now, let me stop right here just for a moment and say, we've come 18 slides into this so far. We're about halfway through where we're going this evening. Within this, I want you to understand, I'm not asking you to simply memorize stuff. I want to give you things to stop and think about the rest of your life. Beginning right now, I want you to think about these things consistently. Go back and analyze, does your theology, your theological system, is it logically consistent? Does it fit together? Does it work? Second, is it factual? This is another way of asking the question or making the statement that it will remain true within the context and without of the context. So what is the definition of truth? It is that which corresponds to reality. If you haven't got anything else out of this course so far, you should have already gotten that. That's all we're saying by it being factual, that this test for truth corresponds to reality. And reality is not, as Richard Dawkins would have you believe, reality is not just a material or naturalistic thing. He closes down other possibilities for truth because he limits and puts into a very narrow frame the possibility of answers that evidence can lead to. And if his evidence leads outside of that framework anywhere, he says, well, I just don't understand, but it has to fit inside of between these two frames. Well, no, his framework is too narrow. Where does the evidence lead? Is it factual? Does it correspond to reality either naturally or, the way a Christian would say it, supernaturally, or outside of the natural arena of things? Does it correspond to reality? And then lastly, is it viable? Now, let me give you an example of viability. When a woman's pregnant, there's a certain point, I don't know exactly when it is. Let's say that it's 22 weeks, 23 weeks. Allison could probably tell us what that is. But whenever that baby is viable would be the time that that baby could be delivered and live on its own outside of the womb. Truth has to be viable. It has to be able to live on its own. It can't be something that you have to prop up with other stuff to make it look good. Mm-hmm. It has to be able to survive in the real world on its own. And that's why when you frame somebody like the new atheist into a corner, and they go, well, we can't explain that, it just is. That's not a good answer. It doesn't stand on its own. Now, that doesn't mean the Christian can explain everything, but whatever truth we put forth ought to be able to live outside of the womb, so to speak. It needs to be able to live on its own. It can't be something you have to prop up with 1,000 other things to make it look like it's true. Let me give you an example of a theological positions held by Mormons. Theological position held by Mormons is that the Native Americans descended from the Jews. Native Americans descended from the Jews, that they have Jewish blood running in their veins. That is taught in their doctrine. So doctrinally, they believe that Native Americans came from the Jewish race. Okay, their teaching teaches that. Now, before DNA evidence, there was no way to disprove that. But they propped it up with things like Native Americans have facial features that sort of resemble Jewish facial features. Native Americans have skin tones that sometimes resemble Jewish skin tones. They must have descended from, so they're propping it up with physical eyesight, but not propping it up with any evidence beyond that. Well, how did the Native Americans get here from Israel? Well, they're trying to say that they got to this continent before the continents divided, but they have no evidence for that either. So they're propping all this up with suppositions or presuppositions. But then when we got DNA evidence, the DNA clearly proves that Native Americans in no way have any resemblance to the DNA of the Jewish race. That you have to go back almost to Adam and Eve to find any resemblances in DNA whatsoever. So no, they're not recent descendants of the Jewish race. They didn't come here in the last 10,000 years from Jews. So that truth is not viable. It can't stand on its own. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so logically consistent, factual, it's that which corresponds to reality, whether natural or supernatural, and it's viable. It can live outside of the womb. It can live on and stand on its own. Okay, we have, for the existence of God, we have rational proofs that fall into the area we call classical arguments. And the way that it's presented here, I wanted you to see a different verbiage for this because we looked at the cosmological argument last time. And the cosmological argument, you'll remember, says that everything that has a beginning has a cause. The earth or the universe had a beginning. Therefore, the universe had a cause and is pointing to a causal agent. Well, here's another way of saying that classical argument. You'll see it presented this way sometimes. Everything that moves is moved by something else. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And this is the argument from design. The cosmological argument is the argument from design. The teleological argument is the argument from order. That anything that has order and functions in a certain way, let's say like a pocket watch. You take a pocket watch and you pull the back off of it and you look inside, you see all those gears working together. You don't think that fell out of a tree and happened by accident, or that a squirrel dug it up out of the ground. You know that some mind designed that. Why? Because anything that's left in its natural state deteriorates. It doesn't create. And I say that again. Anything left in its natural state deteriorates. It doesn't create. Example, you take a brand new Rolls Royce, you park it in the middle of the parking lot out here, and you leave it for the next 10,000 years, you come back, it's a rusty spot in the middle of the asphalt. Why? Because it's going to deteriorate over a period of the next 10,000 years. That natural course of things is to wind down, not wind up. So anything that is ordered has to be created by a mind. And if you look at the universe, it's ordered. So it must have been created by a mind. That mind must have also been all powerful to be able to create this thing. Now we know out of no thing, out of nothing. Out of nothing, everything comes. That takes a lot of power. It takes a lot of intelligence. Has to be omnipotent, omniscient. It has to be able to speak out of nowhere and create everywhere. That's a big argument from a teleological standpoint, from order. So all of these arguments for the existence of God are rational arguments. They're arguments that are making a philosophical argument, but in the order of things and in the design of things, we're also making physiological and scientific claims. Does that make sense? You see how those two overlap? So you got a logical argument, a rational argument, a philosophical argument, and it overlaps with a scientific argument. We know the Big Bang happened, therefore we know that there was a beginning. And everything that has a beginning has a cause. We know there was a Big Bang, and we know there has to be a Big Banger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's what C.S. Lewis says about Christianity. I want to talk to you about worldviews. Now, so those of you that were in church this past Sunday, I told you that the atheist and the agnostic from the radio station that I was in a conversation with on the radio, I guess 6 months ago or so, had called me back and want to have a conversation on the radio again, about an hour conversation between an atheist, an agnostic, and me representing the Christian worldview. So we have an atheist worldview, an agnostic's worldview, and a Christian's worldview. Well, there's also a polytheist worldview. There's a lot of different worldviews, but those are three predominant worldviews: atheist, agnostic, and Christian. The Christian worldview, C.S. Lewis puts to us in a way that is a philosophical way of understanding the Christian worldview. Now, let me just back up before we read this and say what a worldview is and what we need to do as Christ followers to create a worldview through which we see things. Number one, everybody has a worldview. Almost everybody has a worldview by default.
By what?
Default.
Oh, okay.
That's not a good thing. Most people have a worldview by default. What's the default? The default is my culture, the culture I was born into, the family I was born into, the friends that I had growing up. All of those had influence on me. And rather than me going out and looking for truth and bringing those truthful elements together to put together a worldview through which I view everything else in the world, which is what people ought to do, is take all those things that we have from our childhood as we were growing up, all those experiences we've had, all the things we've ever learned that's proven to be true, and subject them to truth claims and to objective realities that test those truths. Are they indeed true? And then we need to have the guts enough, if you let me use that word, the guts enough to step up and say, I've held to this truth all of my life. I've subjected it to reality, and I found it not to be true. And so I'm willing to discard this truth that I've held so long as a non-truth. Now I need to ask myself, what is true that I can put in its place? The atheist views the world through the lenses that say there is no God. When Richard Dawkins says, I cannot accept anything but a natural materialistic answer for anything in the world, the reason he says that is his worldview, the lenses he has created for himself, says there is no God. And that's the lens he's looking through to try to investigate everything else in the world. And if there is no God, then there are no miracles. If there are no miracles, there was no creation of the world. If there was no creation of the world, the Bible's wrong, which says that Jesus created the world. If there is no God, then there can be no miracles. And if there are no miracles, then there is no God. If there is no miracles, then there can't be any Christianity. If there is no miracles, then there was no resurrection. If there are no miracles, then Jesus was a liar. All that he is saying is, this is the lens I'm looking through. So I automatically presuppose, my presupposition, that which I come to the presupposes that there is no God, and that's the lens that I'm seeing everything else through. Are you with me?
Yep.
Okay. So
yeah, you used about a straw man, a slippery slope, and a circular argument just then. That was real good.
And that's what the atheist is doing through his worldview. That's what he does. He presupposes there is no God, and he uses that to prove there is no God. That's a circular argument.
Mm-hmm.
So he presupposes, that's the lens he looks through. So what do we have to do to create a proper worldview? Well, we have to realize we also come to the table with presuppositions. We can't lay all our presuppositions down, but we do need to be honest enough to say, I need to discover what my presuppositions are and subject those to that which corresponds to reality. And then build a worldview through which I then view everything else in the world. Here's how C.S. Lewis said it. He says, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen. Now, I need to point out he believes in Christianity because he subjected the truth claims in Christianity to reality. And he investigated those just like Josh McDowell did. Just like, excuse me, just like so many of those guys that began as atheists did, and discovered Christianity to be true. The evidences point to Christianity actually being true. He says, so I believe in Christianity as I believe in that the sun has risen, not just because I see it, that is, I see the sun, but because by it I see everything else.
Amen. That's
what a worldview is. A worldview is that through which you see everything else in the world. So it's important that we come to the table realizing we need to subject the presuppositions we come to the table with to reality, to the evidences, to the historical evidences, to the physiological evidences, to the philosophical evidences, to all of the logical things that we've looked at, the logical fallacies that we talked about. We need to subject it to all the records we have in history. We need to subject it to the eyewitnesses of historical events. We need to subject what we come to the table with to all of those things, and then step back with the best evidence we have and create a worldview through which we now view everything else in the world. And my worldview that I've subjected everything else to is this.
Amen.
I put this on trial. I don't just come to the table accepting this out of thin air. I have come to this table as a person who was a skeptic. At the very best, I was a skeptic. And I subjected this to the evidences historically, logically, philosophically, scientifically. I subjected this to those tests, and I came to the conclusion that this was that through which best would represent truth if I viewed the world through this. Is everybody with me?
Yep.
So what we need to do is realize we come with presuppositions. We're not innocent of presuppositional thought. But we have to be honest enough to say, if we were raised in a Christian household, okay, I want to come and subject my Christianity to all of these truth claims. I want to subject it to the apologetic tests for truth. And if I'm a Buddhist, I want to do the same thing. It's like the guy that I was talking to at the prison one day. I think Scott may have even been with me this day. I'm not sure, but the guy was a Muslim, and I asked him. I said, "So, tell me what you believe about Jesus." And he told me what he believed about Jesus. And I said, "So you don't believe that he was the Son of God?" "No, I don't believe it was the Son of God." You don't believe he was resurrected from the grave or that he died on the cross. No, I don't believe those things. But I do believe in the Jesus he told me of the Bible. Well, the Jesus of the Bible was resurrected from the grave. Oh, well, that's just corrupted text. That's not really true, he said. We've talked about the legitimacy for how you know the word of God is true, right? So we talked about all those things. So I said, well, let me ask you a question. If I were to take the time to go through the apologetic answers to all the questions that we've talked about today, and I answered those for you to your satisfaction, that you actually believed what I was showing you was true because I proved those things to be true, would you then accept Jesus Christ as Messiah? And very quickly he said, well, no, absolutely not. And I said to him, well, that's the difference between you and me. Because if you presented your case and showed me and proved to me it was true, I would become a Muslim. We need to be so transparent as to say, I want to subject everything that I'm saying I believe to the actual text and the historical, philosophical, scientific evidences for Christianity being true. And through those lenses, then I'm going to view everything else in the world. What does that allow me to do? It allows me to come to the table with the possibility that miracles do exist. It allows me to come to the possibility that when we say that the Big Bang happened and the scientists tell us it literally came out of nothing, not an empty room, not just empty space, but no space, no time and no matter, out of no thing, everything came. The scientists will tell you that today, but they won't tell you how it happened because they don't know how it happened. But it allows me to look through the lens of this worldview, this Christian worldview, to say it may have happened because there was a cause outside of time, space, and matter.
Amen.
It allows me to come to a truth that Richard Dawkins can never come to because he's narrowed his view of what a worldview is to say he has a naturalistic, materialistic, atheistic worldview. He's come to this possibilities, all the possibilities of the world, like with blinders on, to say anything outside of my view, I will not believe. And what the Christian ought to do is come to the table and say, I want to subject everything I say I believe to, in the way of truth claims, to these tests, these truth tests. Physical, scientific, philosophical, logical, historical, archaeological. I want to subject it to those truth claims. There are rational truth claims that lead us to an inference of the best explanation. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that some things are not going to be able to be true, proven true physically. It's not like sitting in a laboratory with two test tubes and you pour two chemicals together and they have a certain reaction and turn blue. Historical evidences don't work like that. You can't recreate history like in a laboratory and cause it to happen again and prove it that way. Historical evidences come to us by manuscripts that are close in period of time to the time that they were, of the events, that were by eyewitnesses, hopefully by credible eyewitnesses. The best eyewitnesses are eyewitnesses that have everything to lose if they make that truth claim. That there are many manuscripts, not just one or two, that they're close to the events in time, that they're well-preserved manuscripts, or at least you got enough manuscripts that you can put all the pieces together. These are inferences to the best explanation. That's how history works. History doesn't work by proving it in a laboratory. History works by having a list of things that are evidences for manuscript evidence, archaeological evidence, all of those kind of things that you can put together and come up with the best explanation. Empirical evidence. Empirical is provable evidence. Empirical just means that you've proven it either by experience or by experiment. That's what empiricism is. You've proven it by experience or experiment. So you've got that kind of evidence is empirical fit. And the empirical fit has to fit. You can't, it's like those truth claims we were talking about before. And then the rational proofs have to go back to a morality that would reflect the character and nature of God if you're talking about true claims for the existence of God. All right. Now, this is why when the people recently asked me, Bob recently asked me to come back on the radio and talk about worldviews, that I told him I would do that under one condition. And that one condition would be that if he would come, I will have now stepped into his venue, the radio broadcast, which he is moderating twice for that was a total of 2 hours. I would go back for the second hour if and only if he agrees to come to the church with Julia, the agnostic, and sit down and let me moderate, going to the next step outside of the worldview to talk about morality, because that's the next logical step outside of worldview. Morality, arguments for morality. And we had a little bit of this discussion in the first radio interview where we talked about morality, and Bob said, the atheist said, he believed morality is a result of evolution. And I argued against that. I want to carry that argument further with a 2-hour live event that we would have at the church, open up for everybody in the community, anybody that wanted to come, with a Q&A from the audience, and we don't have any idea what they're going to ask. So it's totally unchoreographed. If he's willing to do that, then I'll come back on the radio show and have the first argument. Now, I would love to go back and have a conversation on worldview, but honestly, an hour is not enough to do that. And the next logical step is to talk about morality, ethics, and what that leads to determine in terms of our choices. But why? Because the worldview determines how we see everything.
Yep.
Morality, ethics, and choices. So that's the natural follow-up. I want to have that follow-up. So if they'll come do that, I'll go back on the radio for an hour and subject myself to his interview. Okay, let's talk about the character and nature of God just a minute. The sovereignty of God. The immutability of God. Immutability just means that he's unchangeable. Okay, so this is a tough subject, but I want to address this here because this goes back to a lot of what C.S. Lewis is going to be talking about when he talks about the sovereignty of God, the immutability of God. Sometimes we don't get a big picture of that. And again, I want to present my argument here in terms of God's sovereignty and immutability. And then I want you to think about this, because I'm going to make the argument to you that probably you have only thought about God in a very small way. And I'm going to ask you to think about God in a bigger way as a result of this. Okay, the sovereignty and immutability is that a sovereign, immutable God acts on, not reacts to, man's changes. In other words, God never changes. And he doesn't react to man's changes. He acts on man's changes. I'll come back to that in just a minute, but hold on to that bigger thought just for a second. John Calvin says it this way: God knows our weakness and adapts to them. I'm not real big on the word adapts in there. But that is John Calvin's quote. He says, God knows our weaknesses and adapts to them. I want to present it in a little different way. So follow this sentence with me, if you will. This is a long run on, maybe even a non-sentence, I don't know. The purpose of this is not grammar. The purpose of this is this.
I'll send Nancy out of the room.
Okay. Watch the word this. This man, with this set of experiences, at this time, making this decision, will always have God act, not react, this particular way. No matter how many changes man has, God has a fixed way of acting toward that man with that set of experiences at that time. As he makes that decision, God always has that particular way of acting. He will always have that particular way of acting. Yes, Pastor Tom.
So would you say then that God, because of who he is, with his all-knowing and everything like that, has already presupposed a particular way he's going to act to whichever man, to however man acts?
No, I wouldn't say it that way, because that would be to say that God has decided to act that way. And what I am suggesting to you goes back to, Chris, something you and I talked about not long ago, and that we also talked about in systematic theology, and that is God is pure actuality. In other words, he doesn't have to make a decision. He is acting out of who he is. He is not reacting. He is acting out of who he is. Another way of saying this is he is not responding. The way that I've said this in sermons before is God doesn't respond, he just spawns. Okay, so he acts, he is pure actuality, meaning he doesn't have to decide, he is. He is all of the attributes that we give to him. He is love, he is just, he is righteous, he is gracious, he is merciful. All of those attributes God is, and he acts out of that.
Okay. So his acts are dependent upon who he is.
Exactly. His acts are dependent on who he is, not somebody else's actions to which he reacts. He has to react to. Mm-hmm. But he is acting in a personal way to this man with this set of circumstances at this time, making this decision. God always acts this particular way. Hmm. Because that's who he is. Hmm. All right. So that's a big thought, but that's a big thought I want you to think about. Okay, so notice God does not change, but consistently acting on this man, with this set of experience, making this decision at this particular way, at this particular time. He is always the same, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He is acting, not reacting. Note, God is not reacting, but acting to specifics. He never changes. God is always going to act this way to this set of changing decisions within this particular man. God is pure actuality from a systematic theology point of view. And we have to form our apologetic with these things, with understanding, if this is who you know God to be, Your apologetic has to fit within that framework. Your theology has to fit within that framework. Okay? So God knows our weaknesses and adapts to them. Like I say, I don't like the word adapts. He does know our weakness, and he does act on them. Okay, let's talk about our exam just a minute, because here's the way this is going to go when we get through here in a few minutes. Tomorrow, I'm going to send you out 4 more videos from the C.S. Lewis Institute. I also paid for these today. The first 2 that you've already viewed, again, I want to thank the C.S. Lewis Institute for that, because they gave us those first 2 videos. We have purchased the last 4, and they are in hand today. And I'll be sending them out to you tomorrow. And in those last 4, you're going to see C.S. Lewis continue to make philosophical arguments concerning very real events in time. The second video is on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So as we head toward Easter, I really want you to pay a lot of attention to the philosophical arguments within that video for the evidences of the resurrection of Christ, and see how C.S. Lewis intertwines those realities and those truths into all of his writings. He builds his apologetic out of his worldview. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to be subjecting everything we say we believe to truth claims and to proofs, historically, textually, philosophically, logically, archaeologically, historically, all of those ways. We need to subject the things we say we believe to those things, and then through the lenses that are developed, we view everything else. So I'm going to send those 4 videos out, and I want you to watch those, but we're not going to come back and do a review like this on those videos. So what I want you to do is, as you watch them, I want you to write down any questions that you might have. But I want you to see this same format, this same kind of thought process, this philosophical apologetics within those videos, because that's what C.S. Lewis does. That's what he does best. I don't know of anybody better at philosophical apologetics than C.S. Lewis. And so you want to read his material. You need to read the fictional stuff that has meaning. Who is the lion in his writings? What are the lion's dealings with people in his writings? Who are these characters, these demonic characters in the Screwtape Letters? And notice what they're saying and how they're talking to one another, and then how they talk to Christians. Within all of that storyline, you see philosophical apologetics coming out of exactly how demonic figures are presented, the weaknesses of man, and what we need to understand about how God has created this void in us that needs to be filled only by him, and how we end up in trouble is to accept other things that we try to fill that void with. And some of you guys have been down that road with drugs and alcohol and sex and living on the streets and all that stuff. And what C.S. Lewis says is, if we have accepted those things and we've been satisfied far too easily, and in the end, they never fully satisfy. We always get hungry again for the real thing. So here's some possible exam questions. I'm going to give you 22 of these. If you're smart, you will write them down and go back to the video of this later. I hope that we are getting a video of this. I'm not seeing that it's being recorded. Are you, Elaine? I'm not seeing it's recording.
Yes, it's recording.
Okay,
and do we have access to the slide for these 22 questions, or should we write them down?
Well, I'll go ahead and send them to you in the email for tomorrow. Okay.
Thank you.
Now that doesn't mean these will be the questions.
I understand.
But it does mean that these are the types of things you can expect to see. We've used all of these terminologies within our apologetics courses, the classes we've had so far. What is the anthropic principle? Okay, we've talked about that in conjunction with the cosmological argument and some of the things that, that are given in the way of principles surrounding the creation. So what is the anthropic principle? We talked about this ad hominem attack tonight. So I may ask you, what is an ad hominem attack, or what are one of these other fallacies we've already talked about tonight? And it'll probably be one of the 15 I've already sent you. Explain the cosmological argument for the existence of God. We did this last time. I gave you the exact cosmological argument, what is known as the Kalam cosmological argument, and I drew the circular diagrams. You remember that? So you're going to need to be able to give the cosmological argument and draw the diagrams and show me how a syllogism works. Part A, part B, part C, and how they function between the two premises and the conclusion. Okay? So you need to be able to do that. So it might be the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the argument from morality, but show me how the syllogism works. What is a syllogism? Diagram a proper syllogism and a logical proof. Where does the word apologetic come from? What does it mean? If you're going to study apologetics, you ought to know what apologetics means, right? What is the moral argument? Okay, here is a fallacy that's not in that group. I'll go ahead and tell you what this one is right here, because it wasn't in the, I thought it was going to be in those 15, but it's not. And it's a logical fallacy called chronological snobbery. Now, what that means is that you judge something by its age. So somebody says, well, that's an old Christian book. It's written by Tozer. Man, he lived 100 years ago. Must not be as good as the Christian stuff that's written 5 years ago, because it's so old, as if Christian doctrine gets better as it gets younger. No, it doesn't. Chronological snobbery judges something by its age. And sometimes these old theologians will have much more to say about things in ways that we understand it that are actually legitimate than a lot of the newer Christian books. So chronological snobbery is just a snobbery based on age. Elevation Church promotes something called modalism. We've talked about what modalism is. What is it? T.D. Jakes is a modalist. Okay. What is modalism? Why is it or is it not an essential of the Christian faith? Can someone be a modalist and rightly profess to be a Christian? What is the Apocrypha? Is it part of the canon? When was it written? Who are the Gnostics? What do they believe? Are they Christians? Dr. Geisler, Norman Geisler, held to inerrancy. What is inerrancy? And what does the Jesus Seminar believe about inerrancy? So you need to know something about the Jesus Seminar. And I've talked about that and talked about several of its, John Dominic Crossan and several of the guys in the Jesus Seminar. Explain 3 ways Roman Catholicism differs from beliefs of the Christian doctrine. What do Mormons believe about Jesus? I've told you that even tonight. What is the difference between the Jesus of the Mormons and the Jesus of Christianity? And then what difference is there between Jesus? Here's a good question. What difference is there between Jesus as we know him and a Mormon man in good standing according to Mormon doctrine? Who do Mormons say Mormon men become?
Hmm.
And then where did Jesus come from, and where is he now? And what's the difference between a Mormon man that lived 100 years ago and Jesus, if that's the case? Good questions. What is a false dichotomy? We talked about that tonight. That's a fallacy. What is relative truth and absolute truth? We've been over that repeatedly. I hope by now that you can give me my little phrase there. Relative truth is blank, and absolute truth is blank. And then what is the law of non-contradiction? We talked about that tonight as well, and last time when we were together as well. The law of non-contradiction. Something can't be both true and false in the same way and in the same sense at the same time. Right? That's the law of non-contradiction. Okay, quote a Bible example with book, chapter, and verse. Pastor Tom, book, chapter, and verse, right?
Yep.
Of an exclusive truth claim made by Jesus. Jesus made some exclusive truth claims. Give me an exclusive truth claim that Jesus said, and then give it to me in book, chapter, and verse. Okay? You should be able to do that right now without ever thinking about it. What are three primary essentials of the Christian faith? Every apologist should know that. Three primary essentials of the Christian faith. What do Christians believe about Jesus that Muslims do not believe? I've talked about that tonight. Okay? Explain in detail the most impressive thing you learned in the text, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. This is an opinion question, but you're going to be judged on it. I want to know what's the most impressive thing that you've learned from I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And I got two more bonus questions here for you. What is pure actuality, Chris? And what is an infinite regress? An infinite regress has to do, I'm going to give you a hint because we only talked about this very briefly one night. Well, let me tell you what it is, and then you can go back and look at the detail of it and be able to explain it better. This idea of an infinite regress, or the problem of an infinite regress, comes out of what some of the new atheists say they believe concerning the universe. They believe, some of those believe in what they call a multiverse, meaning there are multiple universes. And where our universe came from is it spun off of one of the other universes. And where that universe came from is it spun off of another universe. Now, the problem of an infinite regress is you keep going back, but somewhere along the lines, you had to have a bang and a banger. Somewhere you still have the problem that you originally had. All you've done is put it off for a while. And that's what they call the problem of an infinite regress. There are other examples of that, but that's essentially what the infinite regress is all about. So, questions from you guys? Anything that you want to talk about? We've got about 15 minutes here to finish up. If you've got questions, we'll try to address those.
When is the test, brother?
All right, we're going to get to that. I've got a slide here in just a minute. I'll go ahead and give it to you.
So they not only on this infinite regress have proven to make it more difficult, but trying to prove that there's another universe that we spun off of. They just continue to grow the and make it more problematic. So that's okay.
All right. All it does is put off the problem. They still got the same problem.
Pastor.
Yeah.
Pastor. Pastor. This is Randy. I don't know that you have my correct email. Eileen's been sending me stuff and I'm not sure that you do. So I'd like to give it to you when you have a chance.
Okay. Chris, would you write that down for me? I'm a little preoccupied here.
Well, Rand, also, sorry, guys. Rand, well, I can help you with that. And
yeah,
you emailing the...
Eileen, you can just
go ahead.
To me, okay?
That's right. Yeah. We'll take care of it. I do have...
Let me answer Chris' questions first.
Oh, yeah, of course.
The exam is going to be on Wednesday, April the 21st. So you've got 4 videos to go through. Not all of them are as long as the last 2 were. You got 4 videos to go through and have that period of time which is basically 6 weeks. You got 6 weeks to review everything we've got from the class and put any questions to me by email or text that you want to put to me in that 6-week period of time. I'll be glad to answer them by email or text or in person. Telephone call, however you want to handle it, I'm available. All you got to do is access me. Now, I may not be available every hour of every day, but I can definitely work out a time to chat with you. But April the 21st is the date. So write it on your calendar. Be ready to make sure you're through with those last 4. If you haven't finished, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Make sure that you do. Okay. Okay, Eileen, question?
My questions are, well, Randy and I just joined. It's our 2nd class. So perhaps offline, we can have a discussion about how to make use of this time. Because I don't, it may be a good time for us to start going back and reviewing that material, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, you can go over the next 4 videos, but you're going to have a choice basically here at the beginning of May. So this is going to be the test will be the 21st of April. The beginning of May, we're going to be starting a class on homiletics, which is how to preach and teach and study the Word of God. It's how to put together a message, both in terms of delivery and in terms of content. How do you put together a message?
Okay.
That's homiletics.
So
hold on just a second. The second choice you'll have is beginning here in Santa Rosa Mission. We're going to be starting a systematic theology class. I think you sat through some of those, Eileen. So the systematic theology class is a great place to start. But also the homiletics class is not a bad place because in going through homiletics, you've got to dig into the Word. You're not going to have a choice but to dig into the Word, but you're going to be looking at methodology of study, and you're going to be looking at delivery. And then how do you structure a sermon to where it can be delivered in a reasonable period of time? So that's kind of the nature of homiletics. So that'll be in May, and that's when you can look to start your testing. I don't think the 2 of you, Eileen and Randy, need to think about taking the apologetics test. That's unreasonable at this point.
Thank you.
But you start your homiletics class, and then by the time we get to the end of that, you should be able to take your exam. Okay.
Okay, and then thank you for that. Then I'm beginning to understand it better. The questions really I have are for the students, and so maybe afterwards we can hang out for a moment, if you don't mind. It's about study groups, how you approach the material, experientially, but then also this is so it's a lot of information, extremely enriching, but so I'm wanting to learn how Chris and Ken, you folks, approach this material.
Okay,
and so we can talk about that offline.
Yeah, let me interject here. The way you two have come in is the way that we have approached teaching this is to teach a layer of material and then come back and teach another layer of material that intertwines with that, so that you're getting how things fit together as you go along. So in apologetics, just like tonight, I started with all those sections of apologetics. Well, what we've done till now is we've talked about all those things, but we haven't talked about what they were: historic, logical, rational, philosophical, archaeological, scientific, biological, all those. But to be able to give those to you now, you can begin to see, okay, that fits here. That's how it works. So you've got all of those different pieces that we've already talked about. Okay, so the fact that we've already talked about those things, that's the way that we're also going to approach homiletics. For instance, in homiletics, I'm going to give you a little video that's like a 2-minute video on the front end that just says, what is homiletics? 2-minute video. Here's a 2-minute explanation of what it is. And then I want to give you, Chris, you've got the book by on expository preaching. Anointed expository preaching, I think is the name of it. Stephen Olford. I'm going to give you a message by Stephen Olford that I heard him preach prior to his death. And I want you to notice how he employs what is said about what homiletics is in that 2-minute video, how he does all of those things in his message. So more than the content of the message, I want you to see how he does what he does. And then we're going to come back and take all of that apart and look at all of the pieces over an extended period of time. How do you select what scripture to preach? How do you then decide how many of those verses you're going to tackle? And then how do you decide how to break that up? Are you going to do that all in 1 week, or are you going to do it in 2 weeks? How are you going to tie it together? If you're going to do 3 parts, how are you going to transition from one part to the other? All of those things are critical in putting together a sermon. And it's stuff that if you're doing it, it's like if you were to go back and look at the message that I did this past week, you probably could not tell where those boundaries were, because if I did it well, they would be seamless. You don't want people to see that. You want them to experience it.
Amen.
So that's the nature of good preaching. So homiletics is going to teach you all of those things. Okay, is any other questions we got quickly before I move on here? Because I just got 2 more slides here real quick. Anything else? Okay, so it's Wednesday, April the 21st, 3 p.m. at FBCR, at First Baptist Church Redway. So we're going to do it live. Our exam will be live. It's not going to be done on the internet. It will be live. Michael, if you're still there, you'll have to make the trip down. If Donnie's going to come down, if Donald's going to come down and do it, Pastor Tom, he'll need to make that trip down to Redway.
Yep. And I can provide transportation.
Okay. Study the next 4 C.S. Lewis Institute videos. They'll be sent out tomorrow. Study the logical fallacies and be able to recognize them when you hear them or see them. Be prepared to answer similar questions to the ones I gave you tonight. You may see those exact questions or something very similar to those. The exam will be 2 hours long. You'll have no more than 2 hours to finish it. It will be approximately 20 questions. Like that was 20 questions. So you need to be able to adjust how much time you're going to spend on each question. They are not multiple choice questions. They are real live seminary kind of questions. You need to be able to write out your answers. Please don't do what you did. Some of you did to me last time, And where I was expecting maybe a 300-word essay, you gave me a 2-word answer. That is not going to cut it. You will get D's instead of A's, or F's instead of A's. You need not give me, don't give me a superficial answer to a question that I expect a real apologetic for, okay? Please don't do that. You make me feel bad because I feel like I hadn't taught anything when you do that to me, okay? So be prepared to give the answers. So homiletics is the next class. I'm going to give you a text for that if you want to write this down. It's a book by Howard Hendricks, and you'll need to order the book. There's some used ones online for less than $5, including shipping. You can buy a new one for, I can't remember, but it's less than 20 bucks. But you could, I bought 2 used ones today for less than $5 each, including shipping. And it's called The 7 Laws of the Teacher. Or, let's see. Hold on just a minute. I'm going to give you the new name. That's the old name of the book. Let me give you the new name. Let's see, orders. Teaching, let's see. Teaching that changes lives. Teaching to change lives. Teaching to change lives. 7 proven ways to make your teaching come alive. Teaching to change lives. And for those of you...
That's by Howard
Hendricks.
That's by Howard. Yeah, okay.
And listen, I'm also going to send you in the first set of homiletics videos, I'm going to send you a message by Howard Hendricks on how to teach. It's about an hour-long message by Howard Hendricks on how to teach. Let me tell you, there has never been in the history of man a more profoundly gifted preacher, teacher than Howard Hendricks.
Amen.
You need to listen to this man and listen to how he does things. And I want you to also see how he presents. It's not just that he's got his content right. It's how he presents that content in a fluid, linear way to make it understandable. This is the best teacher of preaching that has ever lived, in my opinion. I was not blessed to sit in any of his classes, but I know his son very well. His son was a neighbor of mine in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Hendricks died about 10 years ago. And his son still lives in Charlotte as a pastor there in a very difficult community inside of Charlotte. It's an artsy community. And he deals with some really tough stuff. But there has never been a better, more gifted teacher than Howard Hendricks. And you will see his teaching skill in him teaching you how to teach.
Amen.
There's never been anybody better. We've got our homiletics classes are by 2 guys. One is from Master's Seminary, and the other one is Howard Hendricks.
Who's the one from Masters?
And we bought the one. We bought the one from Dallas Theological Seminary. It's all Howard Hendricks, and we'll get into lots and lots of material. But what you're going to see is I'm going to give you 2 relatively long, but roughly hour-long videos by Howard Hendricks, and then the rest of his classes are only going to be about 5 to 10 minutes. He hits them. Here's the points. Here's the points. Here's the points. And he'll give them to you in 5 or 10 minutes. And so we're going to go through every one of Howard Hendricks' classes in 1 month session. In a 1 month session. There's like 12 classes, but all of them you can do in about 3 hours. And that's the way he taught it at Dallas. He taught 2 long forms on the front end, and then in 5 to 10 minute sections for each of his following classes. Just go ahead and get the book. And after we finish up our apologetics exam, dig into that book. Really, really excellent stuff. Like I say, there's never been anybody better. My preaching professor was Randy Douglas and Stephen Olford. Stephen Olford, you're going to have his text as well on anointed expository preaching. That's the other book that you'll have for this class. So the one I just gave you by Howard Hendricks and anointed expository preaching by Stephen Olford. So those are your 2 texts. Those are the classes you need to prepare for. And you'll have your exam on the 21st. All right?
Yes. Do you mind taking the screen sharing down for a minute?
Okay.
So that we're just in the room together. Or if you're done with the, thank you so much. And then, everybody. And then, okay. I'm just going to be honest. So I went to grad school and I feel like I'm in grad school again. It's a real blessing, but it's also very intimidating. And it's been a long time for me. And so I was having some self-talk around that. So I just I want to voice it a little bit, like, so and kind of speaking for, if you don't mind, gosh, Randy, speaking for Randy too, it's been a long time since we've put pen to paper, since we've studied. What excites me is the breadth of knowledge and also your command over teaching. It's real thrilling. If I wasn't confused and couldn't keep up, it would just mean that I was being taught stuff I already knew. So that part I'm really comfortable with. I'm grateful, actually. And so, and then, so as to, I know that you work with people in the mission. So as to grammar, syntax, writing, these things are forgiven as each student is learning. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm more concerned, Eileen, about your content than anything else here. I'm not a grammar teacher. Like I've told these guys before, I'm not teaching logic, but you're going to have to learn a little bit of logic. But understand, you and Randy are coming in at the end of this.
I'm okay with that.
This is you can't expect to pick up and be able to understand apologetics by taking 2 classes. You're not gonna get. You're coming in on the tail end, and we're at the climax of this thing right now.
It's so great. It's so fantastic.
We're at the
really
top
thrilling.
So when we get into homiletics, we're going to start at the base level, ground level. Mm-hmm. But every week, every time, we're going to build on the other, and it's what Kay Arthur always called precept upon precept. Build precept upon precept. So what we lay as the foundation in those first weeks, we're going to build on. And that's why I believe Howard Hendricks taught like he did. He teaches that big clump on the front end, and then he taught in small segments that showed you how to build each of those steps. Indeed. And then each of those little steps, what we're going to do is we're going to then turn to the guys at Dallas Theological Seminary, or the guys at Masters. And the guys at Masters are going to take that apart and flush it out, show the big picture of this, and show all the details of how to do each of those steps. Okay. So that when Howard Hendricks says, read the text. Mm-hmm. Okay, that sounds good, but how do I read the text? Do I just sit down and read it? Do I study it? Do I need to do word studies? What do I need to do? Well, the guy at Masters is going to say, here's what you do first, here's what you do second, here's what you do third. Okay? Right. But you need to study that enough that when we get ready to put the next layer on that that you've got something beyond that to step on. You know, if you hadn't done all of this work, there's no place where you're going to be stepping out in midair.
That's
which
right.
is kind of where you guys are now. You're stepping out.
That's exactly. I was just going to say where we are right now.
So you don't want to be there when you get to the end of the homiletics class. You want to be able to say, okay, I got the first class and I thought about that enough and studied enough and considered all of the things enough, and I asked enough questions and I got those questions answered, that now I've got a foundation. I can take that next step, so that when Hendricks presents that next step, you're there. You're there. When we get over to masters and they start taking all those pieces and flushing them out, you go, I remember when Hendricks talked about that, and now we're flushing this out. He's telling me exactly how to do all of this stuff.
Yes.
So,
well, and the other, go ahead.
Consistently learning and spending time in between. If you're not spending time studying in between, you're going to be lost.
Mm-hmm.
This is seminary level stuff. I mean, I make no bones about that. You are stepping into seminary level work, and if you are not studying in between, spending time in the text, spending time reading the material that I'm giving you to read, asking questions about the videos and asking questions about the written material, when you get through, you might have memorized a few things, but you're not going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing all of those things, you are going to get it. I listened to a commentary today, and the guy was saying, and I relate so much. I mean, he said, some of you guys, and this was a guy doing a commentary that probably some of you would know. He's in podcast, and he's doing a whole lot of stuff on the internet, and he's got his own television show now. So I'm watching him, and he says, I know a lot of you people think that I'm really smart, but he said, I flunked out of college. Now, I flunked out of college because I wasn't interested in what I was studying. I just wasn't interested in it. And so I flunked out of college. But I am interested in what I'm doing right now. And I've taken time to learn those things. And so it's not that I'm smart in a whole lot of areas. It's that I do know how to deal with the things in this area that I am dealing in. So in this one little area, I know how to deal. Folks, I am not as smart as you might think I appear. But I do know a lot about this stuff because I have worked very, very, very hard to learn it.
Amen.
I have studied. I am dyslexic. I have to study harder than the average bear to get in the pulpit on a Sunday morning. I told Chris the other day, sometimes I'll read a text with, let's say, 5 verses in it. Before I get in the pulpit, so that I don't stumble over myself, I might read those 4 or 5 verses 50 or 60 times. Because in my dyslexia, I have to work that hard to be able to not distract from what I'm trying to say, just to read a few verses. But if you will work this hard, you will get this stuff.